Cameroonian soldiers kill 20 Boko Haram fighters in northern Nigeria. Liberia after the Ebola outbreak. How the country plans to strengthen its healthcare system. And the times are changing. Obama mania sweeps Cuba. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Tonight, we begin in northern Nigeria, where Cameroonian soldiers killed at least 20 Boko Haram fighters on Wednesday during a raid carried out by a multinational force tasked with crushing the terrorists. Military sources say the Islamist fighters were killed in the town of Jibrila, which is about 10 kilometers from the Cameroonian border. Now, the Cameroon Defense Ministry says 12 hostages were freed and munitions and armored vehicles were seized during the operation. Boko Haram has waged war a 6-year campaign of violence in an attempt to establish an Islamic state in northeastern Nigeria. Some of Boko Haram's attacks have spilled over Nigeria's border into neighboring countries, including Cameroon, which has been the target of suicide bombings in recent months. Now, for more on the multinational force operation against Boko Haram, reporter Eugene Fongwa joins me on phone from Yaoundé, Cameroon. Good evening, Eugene.
Good evening, Vincent.
Yes, now, we know that this has been an ongoing operation there. First, start by telling us about the hostages that were released. Where have they been identified to have been from?
Yes, these were about a dozen hostages that were released during the most recent raid inside of Nigeria by Cameroonian forces. These hostages are Nigerians, and they have been returned to Nigerian forces on the other side of the border. Cameroon has been carrying out these raids over the last couple of weeks and going into Nigeria, which is a very change in strategy for the Cameroonian forces that for most part stays on its side of the border.
Now, there have been attacks in the past in Cameroon. Are things getting any better, especially deeper and deeper inside Cameroon?
Not at all. Not at all. There are small attacks almost on a weekly basis, often not reported. The whole of northern Cameroon is still under high security alert. You remember that Cameroonian forces working alongside the forces of the multinational task force have been waging this campaign since 2013. And as we speak, northern Cameroon remains a major target for Boko Haram that comes in once in a while. Over the last couple of weeks, we have seen the number of suicide attacks go up. We've seen the number of landmines that have exploded, some killing top commanding officers in the Cameroonian military force.
So from what you hear, does it mean the strategy that is being employed right now is not succeeding that much?
Please come again.
Is the strategy working, the strategy they're using of pursuing Boko Haram?
It has kept the number of attacks at bay. They are now small, highly targeted attacks, which is very different from what we saw toward the end of last year, which were mass invasions of hundreds of Boko Haram fighters. Now what we see are small targeted attacks, mainly of suicide bombers and the landmines that we're beginning to see in greater numbers.
Now, very quickly, any of the attackers ever been connected to Cameroon itself, or are they all coming from Nigeria?
It is very difficult to say. It's true that some of the fighters have been recruited from inside of Cameroon. You need to know that northern Cameroon and northern Nigeria has the same population structure. There's the same people from the same ethnic group that speak the same local languages. And so it's really difficult to ascertain the identity of the attackers. We know that they come in from outside the border from Nigeria, from northern Nigeria, but there have been reports of recruitment of Cameroonians from the north.
Well, Eugene, thank you very much. Eugene Fongwa reporting from Yaoundé, Cameroon. Now, speaking Thursday in Washington, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry painted a very grim picture of the Islamic State group. He says the terrorist organization is responsible for crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing in Syria and Iraq. Secretary Kerry says the militant group has specifically committed genocide against Christians, Yazidis, and Shia Muslims.
In 2014, the terrorist group Daesh began to seize territory in Syria and Iraq, overrunning major cities and committing atrocities. The United States responded quickly by denouncing these horrific acts and, more importantly, taking coordinated actions to counter them. My purpose in appearing before you today is to assert that, in my judgment, Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control, including Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims. Daesh is genocidal by self-proclamation, by ideology, and by actions, in what it says, what it believes, and what it does. Daesh is also responsible for crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing, directed at these same groups, and in some cases also against Sunni Muslims, Kurds, and other minorities.
Well, Kerry's statement marks only the second time a U.S. administration has declared that a genocide was being committed during an ongoing conflict. The first was in 2004, when then Secretary of State Colin Powell determined that atrocities in Sudan's Darfur region constituted genocide. Now, the World Bank Conference on Land and Poverty this week is putting special emphasis on women and property rights, particularly land rights. Delegates at the conference argue that gender equality is key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Africa 54's Esther Githu-Ewart reports.
The mere mention of land in Africa conjures different reactions ranging from excitement to accusations of injustice. Land rights across the continent is a contentious issue. Few own vast pieces of land. Meanwhile, a majority of the population owns strips of land or none at all. During a question and answer session on poverty and land issues last year, the World Bank engaged global faith groups to share their views. Ruth Messenger is president of the American Jewish World Service.
It's a serious problem in agriculture, and I would say to all of us that protecting individual and smaller farmers' right to land is not only essential to moving people out of poverty, but it's a better weapon against climate change than large land grabs for exploitative use.
In many countries, politicians own thousands of acres of land, some acquired legally and others through illegal means. The words land grabbing resonate across the continent, where the rich use tactical methods to steal land from the public. Mohammed Ashamawi is president of Islamic Relief Worldwide.
Africa is not poor, but there are reasons for why poverty is happening. One of them is, for example, corruption. It is not the lack of resources, it is the way the resources are being distributed.
The continent is rich with minerals, oil, and other natural resources, yet most of the population live in abject poverty. Women who till the land have none to call their own. This is largely so due to cultural barriers that deny women ownership of property in patriarchal societies. Jim Yong Kim, president of the World Bank Group.
I think that the moral imperative to end poverty is something we can agree on. But what we also have to talk about is what's the best way to get there. You know, we're for smallholder farmers, we're against land grabs. But there is evidence as to what is the best size of agricultural operations to feed the most people. Let's have an argument about that. Let's put the evidence on the table and let's discuss that. Let's talk about how to build dams, for example, that provide clean energy for many years while having the least possible impact on the people who live near the rivers.
Many in Africa are still struggling to get access to clean water, energy, proper transportation of goods and services, or even maximize on agricultural productivity.
We have to look at the issue of land tenure and land rights. We have to look at the power of resettling people not in places where they are shunted aside, but in places where there are new sustainable development opportunities for them.
Land and poverty remain a source of conflict among communities and families that can spill over beyond the borders of a country. Reformers hope that the current conference at the World Bank will help charter the way forward. Esther Githu-Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
Well, turning now to education, a new institution of higher learning is seeking to prepare and equip Africa's leaders of tomorrow. It is the African Leadership University, being launched this week on the East African island of Mauritius. For more about what's being dubbed the University of the Future, reporter Ruben Chama joins me live via Skype from Port Louis, Mauritius. Welcome, Ruben.
Yes, Vincent, very well. As you said, the African Leadership University was launching this week here in Mauritius, and we've just witnessed the grand opening of the newly established institution at its Mauritius campus, which was graced by several African leaders, including the widow of the former South African President Graça Machel, and a number of other leading, other leaders from different parts of the world.
Now, who really is behind this university? Who created
it? Well, the African Leadership University is actually a network of universities that are going to crop up across Africa, and it was founded by a renowned social entrepreneur and educationist by the name Fred Swanika. Fred Swanika is a Ghanaian-born who believes very strongly that Africa's prosperity principally will depend on the caliber of its leaders. So he's been credited recently for his zeal in developing young leaders, primarily in Africa. And probably you'll remember that he also founded the African Leadership Academy, which is based in South Africa and has been offering pre-university programs to students, high school students.
Now,
that emphasizes.
I'm curious about this university being called a leadership university. Many people believe when people go to university, they're also being trained to become leaders. What is unique? Who is attending, and what are they studying?
Largely, the mission of this university is actually to offer programs designed to develop Africa's leaders, young talents, focusing on young talents. And a lot of the students are drawn from different countries. We had, for example, in today's ceremony, we had faculty leaders from the university. We also had some political leaders from Mauritius, which has accredited the first campus here, and also we've been told that in the next coming months they are opening a new campus in Rwanda. So it's quite a unique model, especially in the sense that they are giving fresh ideas, fresh approach to university education.
Well, Ruben, thank you very much for your reporting. Ruben Chama reporting live via Skype from Port Louis, Mauritius. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vincent Makori. Coming up, how the United States can make a big cut in its carbon emissions. Stay with us.
Science and technology, here's what's new.
What's new? It's called the Kaleidotorch, made by the R-Cube company. It's a flashlight and a tabletop lamp, a lamp that emits an ambient light, good for when the house lights go out, good for use as a night light or a work light that doesn't invade other spaces. Adjust the brightness by moving the sleeve on this device up or down. The R-Cube company says the Kaleidotorch gives off enough light to help you read by. But it looks like reading could be a bit of a chore if the Kaleidotorch is your only light source. It certainly works as a mood light with its soft ambient glow. Reviews of the Kaleidotorch, as any Google search will demonstrate, have been almost all good. The Kaleidotorch runs on 3 AAA batteries and comes in a variety of colors. For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grossans.
Well, it's time now for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with part 2 of our interview with Dr. Francis Kate, Deputy Minister of Health Services and Chief Medical Officer of Liberia.
Thanks, Vincent. Today we have more of my conversation with Dr. Francis Kate, as Vincent mentioned, Deputy Minister of Health Services and Chief Medical Officer of Liberia. I asked him what memories he could share from his personal experience tackling Ebola in his country and some of the priorities moving forward with regards to Liberia's healthcare system. Take a listen.
What I remember the most is seeing the amount of Liberians dying and bodies being picked up, and the president had to make a major decision to go into cremation because we did not have the capacity to do safe burials of all those that were dying on a daily basis. Liberia had a civil war, and there were people traumatized from the civil war, many of whom have now gone through psychological help and so forth. Then, of course, you have Ebola, which also became traumatic. There are some hopelessness in people looking at mental health issue.
Let's talk about the priorities in terms of healthcare system strengthening. Where does the country stand, and what are the priorities now?
We are looking at building a resilient healthcare system. That resiliency comes into looking at a couple of things. One, building capacity of healthcare workforce, looking at surveillance as a key, component of that. But most importantly, laboratory is very, very critical. So trying to look at putting in the right kind of laboratory equipment that will quickly help us to identify if there is a disease, what kind of diseases it is, and so forth. And then looking at IPC. IPC is very important, infection prevention and control. So those are things that we are doing to rebuild our healthcare systems.
If there was to be an outbreak, would you say Liberia is ready?
Definitely. I can tell anyone with not a single iota of doubt that we are prepared 24/7. We've seen, after we were declared Ebola-free on the 9th of May, we had 2 resurgences of Ebola in the country. The first one, we were able to contain it immediately. And then the last one we just had, from the time we realized this patient was declared was Ebola positive, based on the PCR, within 8 hours, we were able to line list 131 contacts.
Contact tracing was immediate.
Contact tracing was immediate, and we had all of the response mechanism in place.
Let me get your perspective on what is happening now, the Zika outbreak in the Americas. What would you say are some of the lessons learned that Liberia went through that perhaps you could share?
Yeah, I think the key lesson here is the fact that when there is a disease outbreak, one of the things that is very important is that how you communicate that to the people. When you come there, immediate communication and also allowing them to tell their story. Because every time you come over and bombard people, you will have a resistance. One of the things I tell people, illiteracy does not equate to ignorance.
You were actually nominated at this position maybe less than a year ago. What are your personal goals?
At the age of 12, I told my mother I wanted to become a doctor because there was no doctor in the village. A herbalist put herbs in her eye, and this is what left her with one eye. And I felt I wanted to become a doctor. I didn't know what it would take. But through the help of God and good people here in America, after my graduation from high school, I came to the United States, being the first one from my entire tribe, and graduated from Makori College, went to medical school. People supported me through. And now, went back to Liberia, came back, worked here as a public health director, and went back. With my new position, what my goal is that my action or inaction should not cause a death of a little child in a particular village. That every time I take an action, that should be to to help that little boy or girl or that mother or that father in that particular village so that they can be healthy enough to provide the kind of manpower that Liberia needs to sustain itself.
And Dr. Kate visited Washington, D.C. at the invitation of the United Nations Foundation to share Liberians' experience and strategies in tackling the Ebola crisis and measles outbreak. And that's our Africa Health Report for today. Vincent?
Well, thanks a lot, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Madu's Health Reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, U.S. weather scientists from national labs in Boulder, Colorado say the United States can cut its carbon emissions by nearly 80% using existing technologies. They predict this could happen in less than 15 years if America thinks big about the weather. Shelley Schlender has more.
Thanks to these wind turbines, Kansas farmer Ted Bannister says a gusty breeze means money.
Now on a windy day, I'm willing to buy lunch for somebody. That's money in my pocket.
Midwestern wind is so abundant, in theory, it could light up East Coast cities. But just as it's impossible to drive fast in a traffic jam, it's out of the question to send energy across the country on today's transmission lines.
They're not like highways because the on-ramps and off-ramps are so incredibly expensive. State, federal, county, and then certainly on the business side of it, they've been much more competitive than cooperative.
And there's another problem. Even in Kansas, wind doesn't always blow, requiring backup fossil fuels. But as this time-lapse wind simulation shows, the U.S. is so big, the wind is always blowing somewhere. The entire country could rely on that, says meteorologist Alexander McDonald.
Weather's big. If we can look at the larger scale, then we will see that wind and solar do work.
McDonald says that with a national plan for more wind turbines and solar panels, the U.S. could harvest enough energy to power the entire country without needing major fossil fuel backup. A nationwide grid of high-voltage direct current transmission lines could send this energy anywhere instantaneously.
It's a superhighway for electrons, just like our highway superhighway.
The electron superhighway could reduce U.S. carbon emissions by 80% by the year 2030, for less money than staying with fossil fuels.
I would give it a thumbs up in terms of the technological feasibility.
But energy analyst Sarah Ladislaw warns that business as usual in the power industry will block it.
If you think about it from a regulatory and market resolution standpoint, I just think there's a lot of things that would have to get resolved.
She adds that most communities oppose more power lines overhead. But the leader of site optimization on McDonald's team has another idea.
A 5 gigawatt wire is about this sort of big, and you can bury it underground.
Christopher Clack says that burying power lines in railroad right-of-ways would cost more than having them overhead. But it would be far less expensive than staying with fossil fuels, as long as the electron superhighway is as big as the changing weather.
If you want to do it cheaply, go as big as you can. If you want to pay more money, go small.
Clack and McDonald say that if policymakers join them in thinking big, the U.S. could become a renewable energy nation in less than 15 years. For VOA News, I'm Shelley Schlender.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, how times have changed. A closer look at a new souvenir trend in Cuba. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Nigeria, 2 female suicide bombers killed 22 at a mosque in Maiduguri. In Ivory Coast, France offers 30,000 euros of medical supplies and emergency equipment to help those wounded in the recent deadly attack in the country. In Zimbabwe, the UN Children's Emergency Fund warns that the country faces its worst malnutrition crisis in 15 years due to a severe drought. Voters in Congo-Brazzaville say they want jobs, peace, and a decent standard of living ahead of the country's presidential elections. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Led by two social media heroes, Mexicans are increasingly taking to social media to combat rude and anti-civic behavior in their society. The super citizens use comedy to expose bad behavior in Mexico City, where street vendors, protesters, auto mechanics, security guards, and delivery vans regularly block entire streets. Given that traffic laws are rarely enforced in the Mexican capital, and the wealthy and influential often hire armed bodyguards, some situations can escalate quickly. The trend is part of a movement that is also taking hold in other parts of Latin America. Well, next up, Denmark has just won a very cheerful accolade. According to the World Happiness Report that was prepared by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and convened by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the report weighs people's health and access to health care, family relations, job security, political freedom, and the degree of government corruption. Denmark's high rates of volunteering is also considered a potential factor by many. Cycling Without Age is a volunteer organization which gets pilots to cycle elderly people. Women hold 43% of top jobs in the public sector. Denmark is also known for its extensive and generous cradle-to-grave welfare. Incidentally, the country that was ranked last was Burundi. Well, and finally, changing times inspire a new trend. Now, the anticipation of an upcoming visit by U.S. President Barack Obama has prompted a cottage industry of Americana in Cuba. It is aimed at both the local market and the thousands of tourists crowding into Havana this spring season. Locals are cashing in on Obama mania, creating shirts, flags, and buttons depicting Americana and the U.S. president in various humorous situations in Cuba. American flags on shirts, cars, bicycle, taxis, hats, and worn as tights by strolling women in old Havana are a common sight. For Cubans from all walks of life, the U.S. presidential visit is viewed with mounting excitement and hope for a better economic future for the people of this impoverished country. And that is what is trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
This word is from a story about Mali's presidential election.
It is a wide-open race with 28 candidates running for president. Though 4 of them have been prime minister, there is no government-backed candidate.
A candidate is a person who is running for a political office.
And a candidate could be seeking any elective office, from a national president to a city mayor.
Now, when you hear the word candidate, your English will be good enough to know what this news word means.
For more news words, visit our website at learningenglish.voanews.com.